Okay. According to raisingandeducatingdeafchildren.org, over 75% of deaf or hard of hearing children in the U.S. are mainstreamed. According to deafculture3500.wordpress.com, mainstreaming is enrolling a child in an educational environment with students who reflect the majority of the society, but who are different in some way than the child who is mainstreamed. An example of this would be parents sending their deaf child to a public school. There are deaf schools in which the sole method of communication is sign language, and all of the students are deaf or hard of hearing. You would think that if three-fourths of our deaf children are in public schools, we would make sure that we are giving our best resources in order to help them learn, right? Well, I believe that public schools are not doing the best that they can to assist deaf children. Socially, educationally, and culturally, I believe that public schools are failing deaf children. Deaf children in public schools are often lacking in social skills. Redefined.com states that often there may be no other deaf children in their class. In fact, sometimes there may be no other deaf children in the entire school. Imagine spending 8 hours a day with hundreds of people who don't speak your language and you and that you can't understand. You watch them all speak and laugh with each other, but no one tries to communicate with you because they know that you won't understand them. Or in some cases, you will have an interpreter beside you, but it's hard to ask the interpreter questions and have the interpreter ask the child questions. The child answers the interpreter who answers you. It gets really frustrating. As you can imagine, the children often feel isolated and alone. Most of the time, they can't even speak to their teacher without an interpreter to translate everything. They have to think about whether their conversations are worth having because they take twice as long to have as normal conversations. Socially, I think that public schools could do way more to assist deaf children. Deaf children are also not being given the attention that they need educationally. First of all, deaf students are often having their lessons translated through an interpreter. This can be a problem because it is nearly impossible to sign at the rate that somebody can talk. So the teacher is talking normally and the interpreter is struggling to keep up. There's a good chance that they will miss a word or the child will miss a word as they look down to take notes or glance out the window. Another problem would be that the educational program is standardized and it's not tailored to fit the needs of each student. This is a problem because if a deaf student is having a hard time understanding, or if the interpreter misses a word, eventually the teacher must move on to another subject. The teacher cannot spend too much time on one student because they have many others who are ready to move on. These problems, which can greatly hinder a deaf child's education, could be fixed easily by just individualizing the educational program a little bit. Public schools negatively affect deaf children culturally because hearing people often do not know, understand, or appreciate deaf culture. For instance, in a mainstream school, deafness is often looked at as a disability and labeled as special education. Deaf people do not see themselves as disabled at all. In fact, a lot of deaf people would not take the chance to hear if it were given to them. They are proud of their deafness. To them, it is who they are, and they count it as part of their heritage. Deaf parents are often upset if they have hearing children, just as hearing parents would be upset if they have deaf children, because that means that they will never understand each other's culture. They will forever be separated by the barrier of language, and they will never understand what the other person's world is like. So, as you can imagine, when someone labels a part of a deaf person, a part of who they are and where they come from, as a disability, it can be very upsetting to them and their families. I believe that if public schools recognize deaf culture in the way that they do other cultures, it would really affect deaf children's experience at mainstream schools. There are many pros and cons of deaf children going to a mainstream school. Marlee Matlin, a deaf actress, says in her book I'll Scream Later, "My parents' decision to have me grow up at home, go to mainstream schools, live in and cope in a hearing world was without question the most important of my life and one that I will forever be grateful for." Marlee enjoyed being mainstream, but she also experienced trouble and hardship like I've already described. Luckily for her, she had a deaf best friend who attended the same school as her for years. Most children are not that lucky. I'm not trying to convince you that mainstream schools are evil. However, if schools would make minor improvements, they could eliminate almost all of the problems within their program. Socially, if they would encourage more interaction between hearing and deaf children, I believe that deaf children would not feel so isolated and they would get comfortable with interacting with hearing people, something that they will be doing for the rest of their lives. Educationally, if they would slow down a bit and tailor the program to be more individualized, they could ensure that deaf children kept the same pace as hearing children. I know that this sounds silly because we can't bend over backwards for just one or two children, but I believe that if you're going to allow them to be in a public school, you should be willing to accommodate them just a little bit. And finally, if they acknowledge deaf culture and embrace it, they could come alongside the deaf community and raise children who are proud of who they are, rather than children who believe that they have a disability. I believe that these three simple changes would make right the otherwise problematic mainstream school system.